Almost 30,000 dead, 100 Israeli hostages still held captive, and the war rages on in Gaza. And yet our politicians yesterday and much of today have been rowing about parliamentary procedure. Helpful? Tonight we're in Maidenhead in Berkshire. This is loyal Conservative area and is the seat of the former Prime Minister Theresa May. But our audience here, as always, reflects the electoral picture across the whole country. And they also want to talk about, can anyone stop Putin? Is Britain in decline? And Labour want to stop your boss contacting you out of work hours. Are they right? Welcome to Question Time. On tonight's panel, from the government, Laura Farris is Minister for Victims and Safeguarding. After a career as a barrister, she entered Parliament in 2019 as MP for nearby Newbury. Her father was the MP there in the 70s and 80s. Stella Creasy served on the Labour front bench after being elected in 2010 when Ed Miliband was leader. She now resides on the backbenches and chairs the Labour Movement for Europe, which campaigns for a stronger post-Brexit relationship with the EU. Camilla Tominey has two big jobs. During the week, she's the associate editor of the Daily Telegraph, which includes a weekly column. At the weekend, she presents a Sunday morning political programme on GB News. And Jason Arday is the youngest ever black professor at Cambridge University. All the more remarkable given that he didn't speak until he was 11 and couldn't read or write till he was 18. And tonight, he's making his debut on Question Time. Good evening. Welcome to our panellists. Welcome to our audience here in Maidenhead. Great to see you. And, of course, welcome to you at home as well. The programme is available in all sorts of ways, on iPlayer, on BBC Sounds, and, of course, there's always a debate going on social media, so feel free to join in that as well. Let's take our first question, shall we, which is from Rosemary Davey.
Yesterday's Gaza ceasefire debate descended into procedural chaos. Are MPs more interested in political point scoring than a life-saving decision?
So how did it appear to you, Rosemary, since you're asking this question?
I think that it was such an important decision to be made. I mean, there are thousands of people being killed every day in Gaza. And it just appeared to me that it was a politically motivated point of procedure. And it completely made the mockery of the debate. It isn't clear what the result of the debate was. And I just think that the UK Parliament didn't do itself any service.
Stella, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do, Rosemary. And I want to start, and I think I probably speak for Laura as well, in saying this did not cover any of us in glory. This is not what any of us came into politics for. You are absolutely right. This is an incredibly serious, sensitive issue. It's very complicated. There's lots of different factors to it. And I think last night it looks like we lost sight of what really matters. And that matters because it means that you lose confidence in the decisions that we were making.
So why did you... I've heard MPs all day saying, this does not reflect well on us, but each one has been blaming all the other parties on their own. So why did you do it? And I'll ask the same of Laura.
Yeah, and I'm not going to mudsling or point score about all of this because it is too important. And I sit here as somebody who actually took quite a bit of hope in the end out of the situation, because in November I voted to support a ceasefire. And actually last night what became very apparent is there was a consensus across the House that people feel that the UK should be joining in the calls for a cease to the violence, for intervention, that actually what might be about to happen in Rafah is completely wrong and not going to help. And I also sit here, if you take one name away from you, Aded Lifshitz is an 84-year-old Jewish man who's being held by Hamas. He used to drive Gazans to the hospital across the border. His daughter is my constituent. She wants a ceasefire. There is much more agreement on the ground in Israel and in Gaza that what is happening is not right. And actually what you saw in Parliament last night was a lot of people who want to find a way through that. So the fact that's not come out of this, that's on us. And I take my responsibility and accountability in that process as well, because it means that on other difficult, complicated issues, you're going to lose faith in our capacity to find a way through. It's really easy in public life to find somebody to shout at. isn't it? But actually, politics shouldn't be just about can we shout at somebody because you're cross with them, because does that move things forward? And the saddest thing about last night is actually that probably did move the debate forward. It probably does give a clear steer to the government about the kind of conversations we want them to be part of. That is not the conversation we're having today, and I understand why we're not having that today, but that, I think, is the conversation we would all really like to have, isn't it? Is what do we do next to help stop the violence, get the hostages home, get the aid in, and get the two-state solution that we know is the only future for Israel and Palestine?
Laura. So Rosemary certainly found it a deeply unedifying spectacle yesterday. Did it show that MPs are more interested in political point scoring than a life-saving decision?
No, and I agree with Rosemary that this subject is too important and it is too sensitive to be kicked around like a political football.
So was there no element of that yesterday as far as... I mean, for example, you could level this at all the parties, the SNP, Labour and the Conservatives. But since you're here representing the government, when the government decided to stick in an amendment the day before the vote, was that not political point? Was that not playing politics?
Well, look, there were sort of elements of the wording that none of the three main parties agreed on. That's why there were amendments. And you'll know that it ended with the irregular outcome of the Speaker apologising to the House. And I want to be completely clear, I'm not laying into Lindsay Hoyle at all. He is a very, very decent person. In fact, he has done a huge amount to restore the reputation of the Speaker's chair since he's been in office. He said last night, I think he made a mistake. And actually, in politics, we go at each other the whole time, sometimes in a way that is toxic and unhealthy, and I think that this should be put behind us. I agree with Stella. If you listen to the substance of the debate, particularly the opening remarks from the government minister and the shadow foreign secretary, it was overwhelming how much consensus there was.
So were the Conservatives right to say, well, actually, we're not going to take part in this anymore, we're going to walk out, which is what happened?
Well, look,
then the whole thing all went
yeah, look,
array.
It unravelled. I accept that.
Was Penny Mordaunt right to say we're not going to take part in this and to walk out?
Because I almost lost track of what the procedural issues were.
But
there were
what happened.
There were three
Was she right to do that?
There were three amendments. It impeded the SNP from putting theirs forward. I may not even be saying it quite correctly. Somebody can jump in. But what happened was not a sort of resolution of the issue. Penny raised a perfectly proper procedural point.
So she was right to walk out then?
Look, as I say...
And so for the government to withdraw from the whole thing completely?
The Speaker made the unusual decision to apologise, and you can... I'm not going for him at all.
No,
but that's how the evening ended. But I think just going back to where there were points of agreement, there was an agreement that there was an immediate need to stop fighting, to get the hostages out as an imperative, to get rapid and unimpeded aid into Gaza. And actually, if you look at what David Cameron has been doing and saying publicly, talking about a two-state solution, not as some sort of abstract, but actually meaningfully what that would look like in terms of the governance of Palestine, the rebuilding of Gaza, the rights and responsibilities of the two sides. And I hope you'll at least consider that, actually, in assessing how seriously this is taken by parliamentarians.
OK, well, let's hear from some of our audience. Yes, the woman there with the hand up. Yes.
There's a genocide, so why is it so difficult for Britain to vote for a ceasefire when other countries have, other than USA?
Now, when you say genocide, I should say that's the term that's being considered by the International Court of Justice in The Hague at the moment. They haven't ruled on it yet, but they think it's worth further investigation,
as I'm sure you know. There are children that are dying of starvation now.
I'll take some more points as well, if that's all right, and we'll come back to your point. Yes, the man there in the black jacket, yeah.
I think we've got to take account of the fact that the vote itself wouldn't have made any difference to the situation on the ground. That doesn't mean that it is not an important vote. I think it is important for Parliament to speak and to tell the world what we think and what we stand for. What I found really strange is that given the tension and the pressure that some of the MPs have been under when, they are protests, near people's houses or in front of people's houses, people are being hounded on social media for their views and their stands, I would have thought that the one thing that Parliament would do, or the MPs would do for themselves, is to try and protect themselves by finding a consensus position that doesn't divide the parties, so, sort of pitch one against the other. Because at the moment, it looks as if the government is on one side, and then we've got the SNP on the other side, and Labour somewhere in the middle trying to find a way that pleases all their parliamentarians. And I don't think it is going to work. We need to take the heat out of the situation. It is going too far. And I think we don't have to wait until something bad happens to an MP for us to say, actually, we need to dial down the tension.
I mean, you make a really interesting point. And dialing down the tension was the antithesis of what happened yesterday, Camilla.
And obviously, when Sir Lindsay Hoyle tried to explain why he had done what he did, he was saying that he wanted to ensure sort of MP security, because, as you say, sir, there have been these situations where we've had quite aggressive protesters outside MPs' houses and offices, which I don't think is justified at all, regardless of the horror of the circumstances in the Middle East. And actually, my problem with how things panned out yesterday is that effectively House procedures and conventions were changed in response to an angry mob. Where does that actually end?
Should we just explain that for Camilla, just for people who aren't necessarily completely all over this subject? What the Speaker of the House decided to do yesterday was allow basically 3 debates on 2 amendments and a motion, so that the Conservatives would be able to debate their suggestion, Labour would be able to debate their suggestion, the SNP their suggestion, all slightly different wordings about a ceasefire or humanitarian pause. And it's unusual to have a Conservative... If there's a Conservative and a Labour one, the Conservatives are in government, usually the Labour one would fall by the wayside. Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker, decided to allow all 3. He said afterwards, because he was mindful of the fact that MPs had been threatened and he wanted everyone to be able to debate. Some people have questioned if that's actually why he made that decision, but that is what he's saying, and he apologised for that. Sorry, Camilla, I just thought I should explain that, because it's all procedural, it's all pretty complicated, but that's basically it.
But surely, I mean, in public life, in a democratic country, if an MP doesn't support a ceasefire for their own reasons, perhaps because they think that a ceasefire now isn't the right time, or that they want to wait for Hamas to down their weapons, or they're making the argument that they think that the hostages need to be released in order to dampen down what's happening, they are entitled to have that opinion without feeling threatened by members of the public. You know, this idea that...
But given that some of them have felt threatened, and some have been threatened, many MPs have been threatened, was Lindsay Hoyle right, irrespective of whether you think he was right to allow all 3 debates or not, was he right to take that into account? I mean, the Prime Minister today has said, actually, we have to be able to debate this without fear or favour, irrespective of the danger to MPs.
And that's the point. I think that Lindsay did it with the very best of intentions, because I think he is an honest and decent man who does care deeply about MP security, and he's got a legacy of very much caring about it. However, when does that end? You know, because actually you're then dispensing with the traditions of the House, you're dispensing with the advice of the clerks, because you're trying to appease an angry mob. So it's an angry mob at the moment about Gaza. In a few weeks' time, it could be an angry mob about the environment, and apparently some MPs have the wrong opinions that then opens them up to threatening behaviour and even death threats. You know, when does that end? I think... You know, the House of Commons has to be a chamber of open and honest debate, and people can express their opinions without facing abject abuse. I mean, it's a free country, and actually some people don't support the ceasefire now. That doesn't make them bad or wrong, it just makes them in agreement or not in agreement with others.
OK. Man in the blue top.
Yes, I don't think... excuse me, I don't think Lindsay Hoyle was correct in his decision. It was a breach of parliamentary convention, constitutional convention. And where does it stop in terms of the convention? But going back to the big issue, the question is this. There is only one player in the Middle East at the moment, and that's the United States of America. I'm just wondering if parliamentarians are kidding themselves that they've got any influence on the Middle East. The only person who has an influence on what goes on in the Middle East outside the parties is President Joe Biden and the United States administration.
So do you think it's a waste of time MPs debating it at all?
I think they're just getting flustered over nothing. I don't think they have to have an opinion, but the days of the British mandate are over, and I think, you know, ultimately the only player in the Middle East is the United States, as you can see from Anthony Blinken's trips to the US. David Cameron's made a couple of trips, but Blinken's there all the time. Okay. And that's the difference of superpower politics. Okay.
The woman in the glasses there towards the middle.
One question that we've glossed over, Fiona, I think you asked earlier, was Penny Mordaunt right to walk out of Parliament yesterday?
Yes, I didn't get an answer to that, actually. Don't know if you noticed.
My personal view, I did. My personal view is no. you don't walk out on something that's this important. There are procedural matters, you debate them, you discuss them. That's what she's there for as a representative member of Parliament. Walking out is really disrespectful of all their other colleagues in Parliament and us as their constituents.
Do you want to answer that, Laura?
Well, it wasn't walking out from the discussion itself. It was because three...
Well, it did. I mean, the debates didn't happen after that. I mean, when she
the debate was already concluded. The point was because 3 amendments had been selected in this irregular way. It wasn't Parliament ducking its obligations. It was a very irregular night that ended up a mess. I make that admission immediately, and I've said already that I don't think that it reflected the sensitivity and importance, but it wasn't because she was ducking the issue. It was because of the sort of mess, the procedural mess that had unfolded.
Jason?
I think it's a difficult situation. I think the most important thing, which seems to be lost within this parliamentary discourse, is the preservation of human life and peace. And I think what has happened with this political football, actually, no one's come out of it looking well. And seldom do we actually see parliamentarians be contrite about some of their behaviours in the chamber. I think what we've observed with Sir Lindsay Hoyle is there has been contrition. You know, he made a mistake. And I think given his pretty exemplary record in terms of in the House, I do think he needs to be given the benefit of doubt, and we actually need to focus on the work that needs to be done. And the work that needs to be done is to really coalesce, or for parliamentarians to coalesce, around a permanent ceasefire that really recognises the sanctity of preserving the kind of human condition.
OK. Woman here in the green top.
I think the point made about the threats to sharing your opinion is a very good one, because it's delaying procedures, it's delaying any decisions being made. I mean, think about amongst your peer groups, you cannot say what your opinion on this is. It's impossible. How on earth politicians can't say anything, because then they're told they have to leave their position, or dependent on which way they fall. So I just think we need to be able to say what our opinion is on this matter to actually move forward, and there's something to be done, because at the moment we're still in gridlock. We're not doing anything, and we need to.
That's interesting you should say that, because both you, Laura, and you, Stella, have had a serious harassment to the point where people have either had suspended prison sentences or have been, gone to prison. You've both had people convicted because of harassment that you have received. So how do you, as MPs, feel free to be able to voice your opinions on Gaza or anything else without worrying that protests are going to turn up at your house, it may be your children in the house? I mean, how do you manage that?
Well, look, it's kind of the answer to the gentleman's question of, sorry, I didn't catch your name, but there is something really precious and important about our British political system that's not like the American system, where actually we live in our... I love Walthamstow. If you've not been to Walthamstow, come visit. It's an amazing place. And I love being part of my community. I love the fact that people stop me. They have strong opinions. We do argue. We do disagree. I don't want to live in a bubble disconnected from my community. I think it's really important to the work that we do.
But does it ever make you think twice about what you're saying in the House of Commons?
No, because otherwise you're not doing your job. But it doesn't mean it's easy. And I do think, look, frankly, we all owe it to change and challenge this culture, the press included, as well as the people who take part. Because you're right, it's not just in Parliament people feel they can't have a conversation anymore. And, we do need to have more nuance. The gentleman is right. It's not that a vote in the UK Parliament would change anything directly. What I think all of us had hoped was that it would give a clear steer to the Foreign Secretary in the conversations he's having with our international partners about the sorts of issues and the sorts of pressure we could bring to bear in our relationships and our conversations, not just, frankly, with Israel, but also with the Qataris who have a relationship with Hamas. Because ultimately I hope none of us came into politics just to shout at each other. We did come in to make progress on the causes that we care about and to represent the communities that we care about. That is missing from this debate. It's not just about Gaza. Of course people feel strongly. You cannot see what is going on there. You cannot feel the anger. I see rising anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in my beloved community because of this issue. But we've also got people who care passionately about abortion who come and cross those lines as well. We've got people who care passionately about climate change. This isn't about individual issues. This is about how we are now conducting our politics. And all of us have to change that.
So, Laura, let me ask you then. This is you, as I say, you've been the subject of harassment as well. Yeah. Very serious harassment. Is this something that gives you pause when you're speaking in the House of Commons, or are other MPs talking to you about how they are becoming wary of what they might say for fear of repercussions outside the House of Commons?
I'm aware of other MPs who have experienced serious harassment around this issue. That wasn't my experience. Like Stella, I actually respect and appreciate robust challenge from my constituents, and on certain issues they've developed my thinking, and I think it should be like that. I think the relationship at times between MP and constituent should be quite symbiotic. There's nothing wrong with that. But this is a country where ultimately we settle our differences at the ballot box, and elected members of Parliament must be allowed to go about and represent in the way they think is appropriate without being frightened from doing so. Otherwise, you just drive down the quality of people who are willing to put themselves forward to stand for office. But can I just say one thing in response to the gentleman up there? I think there were two questions where people said, well, what does it matter? Who cares what happens here? But in a way, what happened last night in microcosm shows that it mattered to parliamentarians, although it was a clumsy way of expressing it. It mattered what was happening to the people who were out on the street outside Parliament. And actually...
Well, hang on, Laura. You're not denying there was a bit of politicking going on as well.
Well, yes, but this issue does matter, and it's important it doesn't poison our discourse. I don't accept that we're irrelevant. Actually, I think having a former Prime Minister as our Foreign Secretary gives us extra kind of clout on the world stage. He had an audience with Netanyahu, a private one, about 2 weeks ago. You're right, I think, to mention Anthony Blinken, but apart from him, is there any other Foreign Secretary who would get that kind of access and represent us well? So actually, I think that we are well represented, and I think these issues do matter.
OK. All right. I'm going to move on. I'm sure, I don't want to disappoint those of you who had your hands up, we will come back to this subject time and time again, and quite rightly. I just want to say that next week we are in Croydon in South London. Then after that, up until the Easter break, we're in Cardiff, then we're in Liverpool, and then finally we are in Middlesbrough. So if you live in any of those areas, you'd like to come and be part of the programme, come and be part of the debate, go to the Question Time website. Here's the address. Follow the instructions there, and we would obviously love to see you. Right, let's move on. Let's take another subject. Lots of you wanted to ask questions kind of on this sort of theme, which is why we've chosen it. Matt Ham.
Hi. My question is the United Kingdom in decline or on the rise?
Laura.
Well, look, you know, Matt, that we've been through some pretty hard times. I've only been an MP for 4 years, and 16 weeks after I was elected, there was a once-in-a-century pandemic, followed by an invasion onto the edge of continental Europe, the energy crisis, the spike in inflation, now a conflict in the Middle East. This hasn't been easy times. However, I think we are turning a corner, and I mean that very seriously.
I mean, we're in recession, but you think we're turning a corner?
You don't have to take my word for it. Andrew Bailey, the Governor of the Bank of England, appeared before the Treasury Select Committee this week, so that's politically cross-party and he's politically neutral, and he said that actually he thought that was behind us. He thought there were definite signs of an upturn. The IMF has projected that the growth of the United Kingdom will outstrip Germany, France, Italy, Japan. It will become third in the G7
Hang on, the stats I've got is
2024 or 2028.
Maybe I've got this wrong, forgive me if I have. The latest IMF stats predict the UK to have the second weakest level of growth in the G7 next year, only ahead of Germany. Have I got that wrong?
The dates I was giving is between 2024 and 2028. They predict we will be the third fastest growing country in the G7.
A lot can happen between 2024 and 28. But certainly for next year, they're saying the second weakest level of growth in the G7.
Look,
just put it out there.
So I was looking at a long-term forecast. Wages are finally growing faster than inflation. Inflation, as you know, has come down. When Rishi came in as Prime Minister in October 2022, it was 11.1%. That's the highest it's been in my lifetime. It's now 4% and falling fast. And you know, because I'm sure you watched a bit of the leadership debate, he staked his entire premiership or his chance to be leader on saying that the single most important thing that corrodes living standards is high inflation, and we've worked to bring that down. So look, it's been difficult. I make that concession, but we're turning a corner, and I do think that our best years are ahead of us.
OK. I said 2027 just now, I meant 2024, obviously. Jason, is Britain in decline or on the rise?
It's difficult. I don't know if it's as binary as that. I mean, what I do know is that I think people are suffering at an unprecedented level. If parliamentary discourse is the tune that we all dance to, unfortunately hasn't played the right tunes for the best part of 14 years. So I think a lot of people are struggling. People are living below the breadline. People are having to make conscious decisions between heating or eating. And sometimes there is this feeling, is this replicated? Do people feel this sense of urgency in the chamber? You know, do people have that sense of empathy, that sense of people are really suffering at the moment, and actually what we are residing in is this broken Britain, which is kind of played out in this kind of comedy politics we've seen over the last decade or more. So I think we are in decline, but that's not to say that there aren't very conscious parliamentarians that are not doing their level best to try and make things better. But I think we have some ways to go before we get to where we need to be, because the level of suffering, I certainly haven't seen it in my lifetime, and I think there are many people in the UK who haven't experienced the level of deprivation that they're currently experiencing now.
Okay. Woman at the back in the glasses.
Yeah, well, basically my question is to you is, as a nurse associate apprentice, and with all we're saying about the decline in and recession, it's a struggle it's been my husband to put my my daughter into a nursery so that we can work full time. My struggle, my wish for her, if I could, was to save enough money so she can go to a reputable school. That's out of my reach. And when you hear politicians, going on about how, education's so important, but there's nothing put into it. So what is the solution? Rather than bickering in the Parliament, there should be a solution for parents and, and single parents as well, to be able to access the education they want for their child, for they to have a better future.
OK, let's hear from the woman a little bit further along the same road. There, yes.
I think I agree with Jason. I think it's really worrying the impact that this is having on some of the most vulnerable people in our society. We're seeing significant increases in serious youth violence, child exploitation, and at the same time, over the last 12 years, there has been a 46% reduction in spending on early help and prevention services. And we've got 1 in 10 local authorities declaring themselves bankrupt. And I think it is a really, really worrying picture.
Okay. Camilla.
I think this perception of broken Britain is sort of bigger than the government in a sense. I mean, I agree to a point about Laura saying that the legacy from COVID is not just going to affect this administration but future ones, and not just financially but actually, a generation of young people psychologically too. So we have a situation now, perversely, where we're all paying more in tax and national insurance for declining services. That doesn't really make much sense, does it? I mean, we say about the NHS being free at the point of use, and I appreciate that, but we're paying ever-increasing sums for an NHS that isn't working, and indeed we're paying these sums and we're hearing about people sort of extracting their own teeth with pliers. So you have that sort of failure on a state basis. Then I think you have other failures. You have failures with a sort of computer says no type of society, wherever you try and get something done, somebody blocks you. Technology has become somewhat of the enemy rather than progressing things forward. Then you have a situation where you're dissatisfied with the police at the moment because things seem to be happening on the streets of Britain that shouldn't be happening, and people are having things stolen, and they're the victims of petty crimes that go uninvestigated. And that again creates this environment where people think that Britain is broken. We know that there are problems with worklessness in this country as a legacy of the pandemic. We know that there are problems with people suffering greatly from mental health and anxiety in this country because of the pandemic and other matters. We have learned in the last couple of weeks, I think there was a report saying that living standards have dropped to the lowest levels since records began. Not all of this is the fault of government. And also, by the way, the idea that all of these problems will evaporate under a new administration is, of course, for the birds. Keir Starmer might be the next Prime Minister. It doesn't mean that homelessness is going to be eradicated overnight and that there's going to be no more poverty on the streets of England. But I think, it's a sum total of parts that people are grappling with, and there is this sense to which, you pull on a lever and somebody pulls in the opposite direction.
Okay. Woman here in the front.
Absolutely agree with what Jason has said and what the lady behind. I am associated with a charity, Urban Synergy, which deals with the youth and empowering them, the underrepresented community. And we work at the grassroots level, and we've seen this problem. There's so many more who are reaching out to us, for help, for support, and I don't think we're turning a corner. To your point, I really think the matter is deepening, and there is a need for more regulatory involvement in that area because the situation is just worsening as of now.
Okay, the man in the grey jacket and the white shirt. Yes, you.
So you said it wasn't the fault of the UK government, but I disagree because at the end of the day, it's the UK taxpayers that suffer the most, that we're putting the hard work and labour into this country, and because of the poor decisions of the governments with the PPE and the pandemic, with the billions of aids that they spend in Ukraine, that they're not pouring back into society and letting it flourish. So it goes back down to the government on their decision of making poor actions.
To clarify my point, sir, I'm saying, blame the government for governmental mistakes, but I'm saying that the perception of broken Britain is actually about more than that.
Okay.
For the reasons I listed.
It may be that you all feel the same way, but I'm going to ask, purely for balance, is there anyone here who feels differently from what I've heard and that Britain is on the rise? You've stuck your hand up straight away, so let's hear from you.
Well, not so much Britain is on the rise. Are we in an unstoppable decline because of our ageing population? Do you know, we haven't got enough people to tax, we've got to pay more people. Pensions, the national health, it needs far more money if it's going to look after all these ageing people.
So you think we're declining as well?
Well, all of us are, aren't we? Japan, France, everywhere.
Okay, listen, let me just ask, as I say, you may all feel the same way. This is, it's not my view, but I just want to know if anyone here feels differently. You've got your hand up. Let's hear from you.
Is there a way that we could be more positive? So if we think of the beginning of COVID, we were all we came together and we actually tried to, in our own little ways, change our ways of doing things to be more positive. I guess when the Ukraine war happened, many people opened their homes to refugees. Is the characterisation of Britain as broken actually missing some of that local grassroots efforts to try and bring us back together again?
Very possible.
OK. Stella, in decline or on the rise?
You're right, sir. This is a country full of brilliant people doing amazing, inspiring things. Thank you for volunteering. I meet people, not just in my community, across the country, who are running amazing community groups. They are the social fabric that we don't have anymore. And the challenge that I find here, listening to you, Laura, I know you want to say we're turning... It's a big corner, isn't it? Because it's not a corner, it's a tunnel. And actually, this goes back. This is not just about the pandemic or Brexit or Ukraine. This goes back to austerity, where we stripped the basic infrastructure of this country. It's not by accident that 1 in 7 of us is now on an NHS waiting list. The reason, madam, that you can't save money is because childcare is 80% more expensive than it was in 2010. Every single little piece of the jigsaw that made it possible to build a life has been fragmented. And if you have the bank of mum and dad behind you, you might be just about to struggle through. Then the pandemic hit, then Brexit. And we need to talk about the fact that Brexit has hit our economy, because it has. It's just a fact. If you didn't, 1 in 3 of us have less than £1,000 in our savings. What that means is if your washing machine breaks down, you can't afford to replace things. If your toaster, if you need to be able to pay a fee. And that's the challenge here. It's the unrelenting, grinding misery of just trying to make it through. Who's looking at their shopping bill and thinking, oh, God, OK, inflation is slowing down. And then what do we do? Then we had the quasi-Kwarteng budget on top of all of that, and suddenly your mortgage bill's up the point. And
so is that going to cost us? So
it's just going on and on and on.
And is how much, realistically, can that change under Labour, given that you're not going to have any money either?
It's really, really difficult, but I do think it is possible. Frankly, I wouldn't do this job and put up with all the grief if I didn't think there are different choices to be made. And actually, to your point, Camilla, one of the things, I've got lots of mixed feelings about various Labour governments through the years, but the last Labour government ended rough sleeping, because actually you can make a plan in government and you can invest. And we do need to invest in our NHS. We do need to invest in our education infrastructure.
Fiona makes
so
a good point about
it's not a terminal decline, it's political will.
I think Fiona makes a good point about how much you're going to have to invest, not least after the legacy of COVID. And then second of all, I'm intrigued by the Brexit comment. I mean, Germany's economy is doing worse than ours. What do you put that down to?
Do you realise what's about to happen in maybe 8 weeks' time?
But on the German front?
No. So, well, actually, there's all sorts of issues in Germany. But, you know,
I mean, there are
cannot
issues
compare
across
us.
European nations.
Cannot compare. No, but that's not to do with Brexit.
It's to do with COVID.
Let's be really, really clear. Like, our trade is down. People here will have lost jobs because their companies will say, actually, we're going to take somebody with a European passport. You know, you can look at the figures, you can look at the impact it's already had on our economy, and this government in 8 weeks' time is planning to increase the cost of importing food into the UK. Now, the government itself has admitted that its policy, its Brexit border tax, is going to increase inflation. So, again, a bit like the Kwasi-Kwarteng budget, just when you think you've caught a break, this government is going to make a decision that is going to make it harder to put food on your table at a cost you can't afford. That is why it's not a corner, it's a tunnel that we are going through.
I'm going to take a few more hands and then I'm going to move on. Yes, a woman here.
Yeah, so I'm a teacher and I support lots of families in the local community, and I see the decline in the trips and enrichment that we can give the children because families can't afford it. But on the opposite, I see the incline of the wonderful staff team that we have across the borough. It's not just in my school, it's in lots of schools, getting together and really helping the families. When we were in the first lockdown, for instance, one of my teaching assistants went out on Easter Sunday as an Easter bunny and gave Easter eggs to our most vulnerable families. So in the last 4 years, we've really had that coming together as a team, and that's been a real positive, but it's on that negative of
It's amazing what you do. It shouldn't be an either-or, but we shouldn't have food banks as a normal thing in a modern society.
Let me just hear a little bit more from our audience here. Yes, from the men.
We've heard quite a bit about how UK hasn't turned around, etc. But if you came into power, Labour or whoever, are they actually going to make a difference, or are they just going to blame the current government for what they've done wrong for the last 13 years or so, like what they've done to Labour while they were in power? Is there going to be a difference?
OK, briefly said, and then I'm going to move on.
I understand that is a fair question. That is why Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves are very clear they're not going to make promises that they cannot cost. And that is why some of the conversations people are having are really, really difficult. But you guys are not daft. You know the offer of a temporary tax cut is not going to change the fact that you're probably thinking you have to save to be able to get private healthcare, to get a GP's appointment in this country. Those are the choices that people are making. I absolutely know and take the challenge that you are talking about can we make it real? Because people have also lost trust and faith in the possibility of anything being different. It's this gentleman's comment that makes me the saddest of all. Of course this country can do great things. It needs political will, it needs all of us working together. The ingredients are there, but you're being let down at the moment by this government.
Let me take another question. A lot of interest in this. This is from William Ofai. There you are.
With Alexei Navalny dead and the Russian economy growing faster than the UK and Eurozone in 2023, are Western sanctions against Russia failing?
Yes, and you're absolutely right about the Russian economy, and it's due to forecasts to increase even more next year as well. Are Western sanctions failing, Camilla? Are they making any difference at all?
Well, they're making a difference, and indeed everything that's happened, probably from Crimea to Ukraine to what appear to be these state-sanctioned assassinations, has obviously, from a reputational point of view, absolutely lowered Putin's stock and that of Russia on the global stage. Having said that, Navalny's death is like a terrible allegory, really, for sort of Western hubris about Putin over the course of the last decade, I think. And the saddest thing about him dying is, well, a man of just extraordinary courage and character. I mean, to have returned from Germany to Russia, knowing that he would inevitably be imprisoned, fearing probably for his own life, but doing it for the sake of democracy in Russia. I mean, it's the sense to which he now is dead, and we all know how that's happened, is like Putin laughing at the Western world, isn't it? And being able to act with complete impunity. So, yeah, I mean, I think we can encourage more sanctions. And
But is there any point to that?
But, well, what else is there to do? At the end of the day, who can see an end to this that doesn't involve Putin either being deposed or dying? I mean, I literally... Anyone on the panel got any better ideas of how this actually ends?
Laura? Are Western sanctions failing, first of all? I mean, I saw there's a whole load of new sanctions that have come in today, announced by the government, 50 new sanctions against individuals. I mean, the sanctions against the 6 prison bosses, I mean, what difference is that going to make?
Well, it does make a difference, but I think if this shows us anything, it shows us why it is important to maintain the support that we're giving to Ukraine, because we cannot indulge Putin's sort of alternative reality. I mean, it is absolutely shocking that in 2024 a world leader can kill their #1 opponent and know that they won't suffer any consequence for that. It's also a sign of cowardice, actually, because if you can't take your main political opponent, that shows that you're inherently weak.
But coming back to William's question, are Western sanctions against Russia failing? I mean, Russia's economy grew faster, as William said, than all the G7 economies in 2023, forecast to do the same in 24. Russian oil exports, I mean, obviously Europe decided to stop importing oil from Russia. Russian oil exports are comparable to pre-war levels. Are sanctions failing? Are they a waste of time? Do we need to think of something else? And if so, what on earth could that be?
Well, the tools that we have involve sanctions, but also freezing them out of our domestic markets, which we've done as much as possible, and we've sent people out of the United Kingdom.
But look at their economy. It's going gangbusters.
But it's also the case, I think, that the Ukraine war is costing Putin heavily. It's costing him money, it's costing him political capital, it's costing him the support of Russian citizens. And, you know, we alone can't determine his future, but collectively, with NATO, with the support of our allies, maintaining support for Ukraine, ultimately seeing them triumph is the only way, ultimately, that we can remove him from power.
Jason?
I think it's a very difficult situation. You know, as the proverb would go, everything has a beginning and everything has an end, except Putin. I mean, it is quite remarkable that somebody can really completely decimate an opposition in the way that he has done. I think Camilla made a brilliant point that actually there's potentially an opportunity here for us to really celebrate what Alexei was attempting to do and really think about that as a legacy and how powerful that actually is. That might actually be more enduring than the sanctions that we can place on Putin, because quite clearly he seems to find a way of evading all of them, and nothing seems to stick on him in terms of the sanctions applied. So,
but what does that mean in tangible terms, celebrating Alexei Navalny's legacy?
I think it's I think those who obviously respect liberty, freedom, and prioritise that as fundamental human values, I think he is someone that will be looked upon in the annals of time as someone that embraced that and was willing to die for that, as many people have before him. And he shouldn't have done, and he shouldn't have been willing to do that. But actually to walk back into a situation, as Camilla has kind of said, where he was basically facing death. He was walking into his death, and to have done that with the courage he has done, that is something to be admired. And I think if we can globally coalesce and really be more penetrative in terms of the sanctions we apply to Russia, I think part of it is that it's so fractious at the moment, politically speaking, in terms of the global sense. It makes it easier for Putin to really kind of wiggle through all of the kind of cracks. But I think if there's some solidity in what we do politically, in a global sense, not just in a domestic sense, I think we might have a better chance. But it's a very difficult thing, which is why I think actually celebrating the life of someone who was willing to compromise their own life for freedom is something much more tangible and much more important.
OK. The man there in the blue jacket and the blue shirt. Yes.
Well, if sanctions are working, they're probably working too slowly. I think there's an awful lot of empty rhetoric about what will happen if Putin does certain things. And it was only probably a couple of years ago, I think it was Biden who'd said that if Navalny was to die in jail, there would be devastating consequences for Russia. Well, that's never happened. Nothing's happened at all. So he's acting with impunity because I think he realises that we're not going to do anything major. You know, we'll add more sanctions. But as you say, he has ways around those. So I think there has to be another way of dealing with this, rather than just adding more and more sanctions to Putin.
But to Camilla's point of what on earth could that be?
I think this is the question. I think it has to be something different. It's a difficult one. It's a very difficult question.
But on the seizing of Russian assets, I mean, that's the other thing. It's sort of all of these Russian assets have been seized. OK, well, what's happening to that money? Because that money...
It's just sitting... I think it's sitting in Belgium.
I mean, from a practical point of view, what can we do? Channel that money back into rebuilding Ukraine.
Yes, when there's discussion going on about that, I know. I think it's about 4 billion. The interest on it is something like 4 billion. Man in the glasses with in the middle there. Yes.
The sanctions are failing because Russia has been dealing with intermediate countries, third countries, like countries in Central Asia, in Middle East. That's why they're failing, and no one has the political will to do sanctions on those countries.
Mm. And you're saying that because what? Because they are being supplied with machinery, countries like Kyrgyzstan, for example, which I mean, I think imports or exports to which I've got a note here somewhere, but to Kyrgyzstan, I think it is. Exports from the UK to Kyrgyzstan have increased by over 1,000%. And a lot of that is machinery, which can be converted to dual use and then can end up as part of the Russian war. I think that's what you're talking about, isn't it? William, you've got your hand up again. What do you think so far?
Yes, I mean, I think that... So the thing that was at the back of my mind when I asked this question was the fact that if we cannot make our sanctions work and impact Putin in the way that we think it should, and there is nothing more we seem to be able to do, even the initial response in terms of the strength of our support, I mean, the Western strength of our support for Ukraine, that seems to be fraying a little bit, especially in the US. So I'm thinking, are we going to end up in a situation where we do an about-turn in the future and tell Ukraine to go and settle for something that gives Putin a price in the end, and all our sanctions, all our rhetoric, all our words would have counted not for too much, because they would have lost so many men, and then we would have told them in the end, go back, sit and negotiate a settlement. That is what worries me.
Does that worry you, Stella?
Well, Ukraine has been very clear what they need. This is sitting at the moment with the American Congress, and this has to be a world effort because we are all at risk by the behaviour of Putin.
But it's not just that, because it's not just that, Stella, though, because even weapons that the EU has committed to supplying to Ukraine, because we can't produce them quickly enough, they're getting, I mean, I think it's long-range missiles. They've only had half the long-range missiles they're supposed to have had.
We need to fast-track the commitments that we have made. But I mean, sanctions is not an easy thing to do, but it is a thing we could be doing better. And I want to pay tribute particularly to the work that Margaret Hodge has been doing in Parliament on this, and frankly holding the government's feet to their fire, because we have become a clearinghouse for Russian money in lots of different ways. But also, the gentleman's point about oil is absolutely right. At the moment, there is a loophole where China and India are importing Russian crude oil, they're processing, and then they're selling it back to us
as refined
UK refined oil. That's a clear loophole. And actually, what we're all saying in Parliament, look, we can wring our hands and we can get this right. There is so much more we could be doing to affect sanctions. Because of that loophole, that's creating £140 million of revenue for Russia alone. So there are many more things we could be doing here in the UK before we start talking about giving up on the sanction regime. And I think, actually, Parliament at its best there's been cross-party work on this and challenging the government to go further and faster. And I just hope they finally listen.
All right, let's take another question, because this, too, is a subject we will come back to, sadly. I am sure we will. Parmjit Chandler. Yes.
Yes. Should employees have a legal right to switch off from work when out of hours?
So, this is something that Labour is suggesting. So I'll come to you in a minute. I'm not going to come to you first, forgive me. So Labour's new deal for working people, correct me if I get this wrong, will bring in the right to switch off after work and not be contacted by your boss outside working hours. There are some exceptions to that, if you're on call, if you're working overtime. But basically, you can go home and say, that's it, I'm shutting up shop. Jason, good idea?
Yes. I mean, apart from anything else, to be quite frank, I think people are absolutely overworked, and there are so many reasons for that. But a more serious reason is that, you know, I think people's mental health has been severely compromised particularly in the last 10 years, with the pressures that people now face at work. That's obviously been kind of amplified by COVID and a global pandemic. But I think one of the things that we really need to centre more often is actually the people's psychological and physical well-being. And we do know that, you know, work does compromise that in many ways. And I think what becomes difficult is actually people setting boundaries around work. So if Labour are proposing something that's going to facilitate people having better work-life, you know, boundaries and having that in context, says the person who answers emails at all times of the day, then I would 1,000% welcome that.
So if your students wanted to contact you outside hours, should Labour get in? Should this come in? What you would say? Sorry, I'm just not responding.
I'm always so scared of getting in trouble, so that's just never going to happen.
Okay.
But I mean, the most of there is that fear of trepidation that we all have in our work in different ways, shapes, and forms, because the level of accountability and the lack of kind of empathy around human beings just being human, I think, is something that's always escapes a lot of us from time to time. You know, the world doesn't end if that email doesn't get sent, but for some reason in the moment we don't quite remember that. So I do think, you know, all jokes aside, it's really important that we really think about ways of preserving the kind of human beings. I don't think we do that enough. I think actually a lot of our kind of engagement is transactional, and because of that, it actually places aside the need to kind of preserve human beings, their kind of psychological well-being and their physical and mental well-being. And I think that's really the most central and important thing. And if you have potential policy that's going to administer that or make that happen, then I think we should all be in favour of that.
Okay. You're not in favour, Laura, are you? The Conservatives said this was anti-business.
Well, I'll just simply say this. I think, look, everybody recognises the issue about switching off, but I just say this. There is already a right not to be contacted outside working hours, obviously depending on the job that you do. I used to be an employment lawyer, and I've won a case for a person before, and part of her complaint against her manager was that he constantly required her to interact and respond to emails outside of her contractual working hours. So, first of all...
Well, I must have a word.
But I accept as an MP or many other jobs, work and life bleeds into itself, but it doesn't require hard law. Actual contractual hours do really matter, and they are already embedded in law. One of the things I'm very proud of this government for doing is the way that it's developed and changed the law on flexible working. And I say that as somebody who, when I had my kids and I went back to work, and I know loads of you in this room will be recognising this, it was so sort of difficult and stressful, and there was such a presenteeism that was required. And of course, flexible working doesn't mean a person deciding how and when they work, but it does mean a dialogue with your employer about what might be done, whether by adjusting your hours or working flexibly. And actually, I think some of that has been much better at adapting the workplace to fit the demands of modern life and make it adapt to the way that people live.
Camilla, a legal right to switch off out of hours?
I mean, I think it might be practical in some workplaces. Certainly wouldn't be practical in a newsroom.
Not in yours.
Not in
mine.
And actually, of course, we do have a choice. I mean, I knew when I signed up to be a journalist that I would be contacted on my holidays if some major news broke, and I would be disturbed at the weekend, and I would have to work late.
I mean, there might be other jobs that people might find less fulfilling than you find yours and I find mine, and they might, not want to have their boss contacting them at 7 o'clock at night, 8 o'clock at night.
I mean, and it depends whether it's a boss contacting or it's actually the requirement to start doing work, at 8, 9 and 10 at night. It would seem to me that would apply more to sort of white-collar jobs than jobs that are more practical and would involve presenteeism, because, it's about people being sent emails at inconvenient moments, and this whole idea that our office effectively accompanies us wherever we go because it's in our pocket or on our laptop is, of course, problematic. And it's not just problematic for adults in the workplace, but actually children in schools and not being able to switch off themselves from problems with friendship groups and all the rest of it. I'm not sure it needs to be legislated further for, and actually I think there has been a cultural shift. This needs to be encouraged by employers, and even in the sort of cutthroat world of news, my goodness, we've come a long way since I first became a journalist more than 20 years ago, that we're having conversations in newsrooms about work-life balance. That didn't used to happen, so we've made progress.
Let's hear a bit from the audience as well. Of course, I'll come to you, Stella. Yes.
I was just going to say, working from home, it's about setting your own boundaries. And
of course, not everyone can work from home.
No, but personally, when the end of working day and at a particular time, I set my phone to quiet hours, so I know that I'm going to get quality sleep during that time. And that personally works for me, working from home. I know, obviously, people working in the office don't have that.
All right, woman here in the glasses, yeah.
I think it's a subject, you talked about flexible working there. It disproportionately impacts women at the moment who are, I know you've done a lot of work, Stella, with Pregnant and Screwed and talked about the flexibility of working there. What's going to be done by the Labour government, for example, to support more of those women who want to be able to maintain working in the workplace? We heard earlier about the cost of childcare. I'm expecting my second child and I'm expecting thank you. I'm expecting a nursery bill of £4,000 to work 5 days a week. I've worked in the UK Armed Forces. I was in the RAF for 11 years. I've left and I work as a management consultant, and I'm now being forced into a position where I'm likely to have to reduce my working hours, therefore reducing the tax I'm paying into the state. And so I'd just really love to hear how that disproportionate impact is going to impact how Labour are going to improve things for women, really.
Right, well, you've got two questions to ask now, Stella, because that's one question, and the original question, which is about the legal right to switch off from work. Is this something you're definitely going to do?
Let me roll these all together, because this is about your basic rights and protections and good employers. Can good employers get the best out of their employees? So, actually, I'm really pleased for you, Camilla, that you've made the choices as how you want to work. A lot of people don't have the same power relationship at work to be able to do that. And frankly, a lot of the rights that you have don't come in, thanks to this government and the Beecroft report and all of that, until 2 years in. So we're seeing employers exploiting that. The lady here, congratulations, and thank you for your service in the armed forces, but you are facing an environment where it's all stacked against you. That's not accidental.
So you're going to reduce her nursery bill?
Yes, I mean, we have to, because it's unsustainable. There are people paying more on childcare.
And you're going to be able to afford to do that, should you get into power?
It's one of the things that's actually an investment. This is the problem. This government is so short-sighted. There's millions of women out of work or not able to work in the ways they want to because they can't get good childcare. And it tends to be women rather than men who end up making that sacrifice. So obviously changing that, as you said, means that you could work more hours. It means you probably end up paying more tax. It helps pay for itself. The problem with what's about to happen right now in April is that we're going to push up demand for nursery places, and those places don't exist because we're expecting the people who work in nurseries
let me let Laura in,
to earn pittance. Thank God for Pregnant and Screwed and the work they're doing campaigning on it.
I'd like to also congratulate the lady. I can just see you expecting number two. What we've announced is the biggest investment in childcare ever, and I know because I campaigned for it hard from the backbenches. So you will be able to get comprehensive childcare from when your child is 9 months until the start of school.
I'm not eligible. I'm not eligible for it. We're not eligible for
because you're earning above.
Because you've done it on a single earner as opposed to household income.
So somebody earns more than 100,000.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Sorry. So it is
which is considered
earners.
Wealthy. We understand it's a privileged position, but it still means that we reduce my hours down and we have a single earner, so our whole household income is going to be reduced by tens of thousands of pounds a year. Because if you've got one person who's earning £99,999, they benefit from it.
And
but
if someone
you
earns
earn £1 more, and you don't get anything at all. So you're tens of thousands of pounds worth.
You've got about 20 seconds to make your case.
But the only thing I would say, look, it does apply to people earning less than 100,000, that's true. But I haven't heard anything from Labour on what they would do on childcare. Absolutely nothing. They said they were going to do something as big as the launch of the NHS. But I don't know what that means. We've set out the most comprehensive childcare package in a generation, and I have heard nothing on what they're going to do.
Stella, you would love to come back in, and I'm so sorry I can't let you. Simply because we've run out of time. So forgive me, Stella, because obviously I appreciate you'd want to respond to that. Our hour is up. In fact, we're over our hour, so I've got to end it now. Sorry to all of those who've got your hands up. Just to say that we will be in Croydon next week if you want to come along. But for now, from Maidenhead, from the panel, from our audience here, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.